I never meant to notice her, but the day my friend's mom looked me in the eyes and said, "You think I haven't noticed?" Everything changed. I used to think my friend's house was the safest place in the world. It was loud, familiar, full of half-finished conversations, game controllers on the couch, and the smell of food drifting from the kitchen before I even walked through the door. I'd been there so many times that I barely knocked anymore. It felt like a second home, and maybe that was why I never noticed her before. She had always been there in the background of those afternoons, welcoming, composed, asking if we wanted something to eat, reminding my friend about errands, laughing softly when we made too much noise. She was kind in the effortless way some people are, warm without being intrusive, beautiful in a way that felt untouchable, like elegance belonged to another world entirely. But lately, something had changed. Maybe it was me. That afternoon, I stepped into the kitchen to grab water, expecting the usual emptiness. Instead, I found her standing by the counter, sleeves rolled just below her elbows, slicing fruit with calm, precise movements. Sunlight poured through the window above the sink, catching in the loose strands of hair near her face and turning them gold for a second. She looked up when she heard me. "Oh," she said with a small smile. "You're here." Her voice was low and smooth, the kind that never needed to rise to be heard. I muttered something awkward, suddenly aware of how wrinkled my shirt was, how loudly I had entered, how young I felt. She returned to what she was doing, and I reached for a glass that I suddenly couldn't seem to hold properly. My fingers slipped. The glass tapped the counter too hard. She glanced over again, amusement flickering in her eyes. "Nervous?" she asked lightly. I laughed too quickly. "No, but I was." I filled the glass and tried not to look at her, which, of course, made me notice everything. The soft scent that followed when she moved past me. Clean soap mixed with something floral. The graceful way she tucked her hair behind one ear with the back of her wrist. The quiet confidence in how she carried herself, like she had long ago stopped needing anyone's approval. She opened a cabinet above me and reached past my shoulder for a jar. Her arm brushed the air beside my neck, close enough that warmth lingered after she moved away. "Sorry," she said. Yet she didn't sound sorry at all. I turned too fast and nearly bumped into her. She smiled, small, controlled, unreadable. My heart was beating hard enough to embarrass me. I escaped back to the living room and tried to focus on whatever my friend was saying, but her presence stayed with me like heat after stepping into sunlight. Every sound from the kitchen pulled my attention. A cupboard closing, her footsteps in the hallway, the low hum of her voice when she answered a phone call. Later, when I was leaving, I thanked her for the snack she had brought us. She stood near the doorway, one hand resting on the frame. "You're always polite," she said. There was something thoughtful in the way she looked at me then. Not motherly, not casual, something else I couldn't name. Our eyes met, and this time, she held the look just a moment longer than normal. Then she stepped aside and wished me good night. I walked home with my hands in my pockets, trying to convince myself I had imagined everything. But for the first time, my friend's house no longer felt simple. I told myself I wouldn't think about her again. For 2 days, I repeated that lie like discipline could erase memory. I focused on work, answered messages late, kept myself busy with anything that didn't involve replaying the way she had looked at me in the doorway. But every quiet moment brought it back. The pause in her gaze, the faint smile, the feeling that something unspoken had shifted between us. So when my friend asked me to come over again, I said yes too quickly. He was upstairs when I arrived, shouting that he'd be down in a minute. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, hearing movement from the kitchen. She appeared a second later, carrying a folded dish towel over one shoulder. "Your friend is pretending to clean his room," she said dryly. "So you may be waiting a while." I laughed, relieved by how normal she sounded. She tilted her head toward the kitchen. "Come sit. I just made tea." I should have said no. I should have stayed in the living room. Instead, I followed her. The kitchen felt smaller than I remembered. Afternoon light stretched across the floor tiles, and the soft whistle of the kettle filled the silence between us. She moved easily around the room, reaching for cups, spooning sugar into one without asking, as if she already knew how I liked it. "You look tired," she said. "Long week. Or restless." The comment landed too precisely. I looked at her, but she was facing the counter, hiding a smile. She set 2 mugs down and motioned for me to sit. I took the chair beside the table while she sat across from me at first. The conversation began harmlessly: work, future plans, whether I was thinking of moving someday. But she listened differently than most people did. She didn't wait for her turn to speak. She watched, noticed, asked questions that made me answer honestly before I realized I was doing it. "You always seem older than your age," she said softly. I shrugged. I don't know if that's a compliment. It is from me. My chest tightened. She stood to refill the hot water, then returned, and this time sat beside me instead of across the table. Not touching, just near enough that I became aware of every inch between us. The room went strangely quiet. She lifted my mug and handed it to me. When I reached for it, her fingers brushed across my palm. A simple contact, barely a second. But instead of letting go immediately, her fingertips stayed there, warm, light, deliberate enough that I felt it all the way to my ribs. I looked at her sharply. She was already releasing the mug, expression calm, almost innocent. "Careful," she said. "It's hot." I swallowed. "Right." She picked up her own cup and sipped as if nothing had happened. From that moment on, every movement felt louder. The rustle of her sleeve as she crossed one leg over the other. The subtle scent of perfume when she leaned back. The way her knee nearly touched mine beneath the table, close enough that I couldn't stop noticing the space where contact might happen. "You've gone quiet," she said. "Just thinking." Dangerous habit. Her smile was small, knowing. Upstairs, I heard my friend moving around, completely unaware that the world downstairs had tilted. When I finally stood to leave the kitchen, I nearly knocked my chair backward. She laughed softly under her breath. At the doorway, she reached out and straightened the collar of my shirt with careful fingers. Her knuckles brushed the side of my neck. "There," she said. "Better." I couldn't form words. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the warmth of her hand against mine again and again. It was nothing, and somehow it felt like everything. After that afternoon, I promised myself I would be careful. No staring. No awkward silences. No reacting every time she stepped into the room like my body had forgotten how to behave. I would go over, hang out with my friend, act normal, and prove that whatever tension I thought existed had only been in my head. That plan lasted less than 10 minutes. My friend had gone out to grab something from the store, leaving me alone in the house with the casual confidence of someone who had no reason to suspect anything unusual. "Be back soon," he called before the front door shut. Then there was only silence. I found her in the kitchen again, because somehow she was always there when I was least prepared. She stood on her toes, reaching toward the top shelf of a cabinet. Fingertips grazing a jar she couldn't quite pull forward. "Need help?" I asked too quickly. She glanced back over her shoulder. "I can manage." But she didn't move away. I stepped closer, trying to focus on the cabinet and not the warmth of her standing inches in front of me. I reached past her shoulder and took the jar down. My arm brushed lightly against hers. The contact was brief, but enough to send a current through me. "Thanks," she said. I handed it to her and stepped back immediately. She set the jar on the counter, then turned toward me fully. That was when I made the mistake. My eyes dropped for half a second, taking in the soft line of her mouth, the graceful curve of her neck, the loose strand of hair resting against her collarbone. When I looked back up, she was already watching me. Caught. Heat rushed into my face. I looked away first. The room became painfully quiet. I could hear the ticking wall clock, the hum of the refrigerator, my own heartbeat thudding like it wanted to betray me. Then I sensed movement. She took one step closer. Not enough to trap me. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough that I noticed the subtle perfume she wore and the warmth of her presence pressing into the space between us. "You think I haven't noticed?" she asked. Her voice was calm, low, almost gentle. I froze. Every thought disappeared. My hands went still at my sides. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I had prepared excuses, denials, explanations. None of them survived the moment. She studied my face quietly, as if the silence itself was an answer. I didn't mean," she laughed softly. Not cruelly, not even teasing. It was the kind of laugh someone gives when they already know the truth and no longer need to hear it spoken. "You're easy to read," she said. I wanted the floor to open beneath me. Instead, she reached up and smoothed an invisible crease near my shoulder. Her fingers brushed the fabric slowly, then rested there for a breath longer than necessary. The touch was light, but my whole body reacted to it. "You should relax," she murmured. "You look terrified." "I'm not terrified. Mm." She tilted her head. "Then why can't you look at me?" I forced my eyes up to hers. That only made it worse. There was no mockery in her expression. No anger. Just certainty and something softer hiding behind it. She stepped around me then, close enough that her shoulder grazed my arm as she passed. "Your friend will be back soon," she said casually, opening a drawer as if nothing had happened. I stood there motionless, trying to breathe. A minute later, the front door opened and my friend called my name from the hallway. I still hadn't moved. For the rest of the evening, I barely heard a word he said. My mind stayed trapped in the kitchen, replaying her voice over and over. "You think I haven't noticed?" And the most dangerous part was this. She hadn't sounded upset. She had sounded pleased. I almost didn't go back after that. For 3 days, I ignored my friend's messages, claiming I was busy, tired, dealing with work, anything that sounded believable. The truth was simpler. I didn't know how to walk into that house again after what happened in the kitchen. I didn't know how to face her. When I finally showed up, I expected distance. Maybe embarrassment. Maybe that polite tone people use after boundaries have been crossed and silently restored. Instead, she opened the door herself. "You've been avoiding us," she said. "Us. Not me. Not the house. Us. I've been busy." She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me for a second. "Come outside." I followed her through the back door into the garden patio. Evening had settled softly over everything. The sky was fading into gold and blue, and the air carried the scent of watered soil and jasmine from somewhere near the fence. A small lamp glowed on the table between 2 chairs. She had already made tea. Of course she had. She sat first, graceful and composed as always, but there was less armor in her movements tonight. I noticed it immediately. No plafelismide. No teasing confidence. Just quiet seriousness. I took the seat across from her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she wrapped both hands around her cup and looked down into it. "I shouldn't have cornered you the other day." My surprise must have shown. She exhaled softly. "You looked like you wanted to disappear." I kind of did. That earned the smallest smile. "I'm sorry," she said. The words were sincere enough to unsettle me more than her teasing ever had. "You don't have to apologize," I said. I was the one staring. She glanced up then, eyes steady on mine. "Yes," she said quietly. "You were." I laughed under my breath, and some of the tension broke. Then her expression changed again. Something more vulnerable, more honest than I had ever seen from her. "I noticed months ago," she said. "Not because you were obvious. Because you were careful." I frowned slightly. "You always looked away first," she continued. "You became quieter when I entered a room. You offered help before anyone asked. You listened when I spoke, even when no one else did." Her fingers tightened around the cup. Most people stop seeing women like me after a certain point. The sentence landed heavier than anything she had said before. I didn't answer immediately. She looked out toward the darkening garden. "To them, I'm someone's mother. Someone who handles groceries, bills, schedules, practical things, useful things." She gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. Not someone a young man notices. There was no bitterness in her voice. That made it worse somehow. Only tired truth. The confident woman from the kitchen, the one who could make me freeze with a sentence, was gone for the moment. In her place sat someone lonelier than I had imagined. I leaned forward slightly. I noticed more than that. Her gaze returned to me. The evening sounds seemed to hush around us. "What do you notice?" she asked. My pulse quickened, but I didn't look away this time. "The way you pretend everything is easy when it isn't," I said. "How you make everyone comfortable before yourself. How you listen even when no one asks how you are." I paused. "How you smile differently when it's real." She went very still. Then, almost absent-mindedly, she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear suddenly less composed than I had ever seen her. "That's dangerous," she murmured. "What is?" "Being seen." I held her gaze. "Maybe only if you've been invisible too long." Something in her face softened then, slowly, quietly, like a locked room opening. She reached across the table and touched the back of my hand with 2 fingers. Light, careful, barely there. Yet it felt more intimate than anything before. For the first time since I met her, she looked uncertain. And for the first time, I knew she felt this too. After that evening in the garden, everything changed without anyone saying so. There was no confession, no dramatic promise, no conversation about what we were doing. Yet the air between us had shifted into something warmer and more dangerous. We had crossed into honesty, and once that happened, even ordinary moments felt charged. I started visiting more often, though I pretended it was for my friend. Sometimes he was there. Sometimes he disappeared upstairs for hours, leaving us in the kitchen or on the patio with mugs of tea cooling beside us. The conversations came easily now. We spoke about things that rarely surfaced with other people: regrets, choices, relationships that ended quietly instead of loudly. She told me about the years she spent putting everyone else first until she forgot what she wanted for herself. I told her how exhausting it was pretending to have life figured out when I barely knew who I was becoming. "You're kinder than you realize," she said one evening. "You say that like it's a flaw." "It can be," she replied softly. "People take from kind men until there's nothing left." There was history in her voice when she said it. Another night, rain tapped against the windows while we sat in the living room waiting for my friend to come back from errands he never seemed in a hurry to finish. She was curled into one corner of the couch, barefoot, reading something on her phone. I sat at the other end, pretending to watch television neither of us cared about. At some point, we both laughed at the same terrible commercial. She leaned sideways instinctively, her shoulder brushing my arm. Then she stayed there. Neither of us acknowledged it. The contact was light but steady, the softness of her sleeve against my skin, the warmth beneath it. My body became aware of every place we touched and every place we didn't. I kept my eyes on the television. "So disciplined," she murmured. I turned slightly. "What?" "The way you act like this doesn't affect you." Her shoulder pressed a little more firmly into mine. "It does," I admitted. She smiled without looking at me. "Good." A cool draft slipped through the room from a cracked window. She rubbed her hands over her arms. "You cold?" I asked. "A little." I stood and pulled off my hoodie before I could overthink it. "Here." She looked up at me, then took it slowly. When she slipped it on, the sleeves covered part of her hands. It was absurdly simple, yet something about seeing her in my clothes unsettled me more than any teasing ever had. She laughed softly at how oversized it was, then pulled the fabric closer around herself. "This is dangerous too," she said. "It's just a hoodie." "No," she replied, meeting my eyes. "It's not." My throat went dry. Later, when my friend finally came home, she stood to return it. I reached for the hoodie, but instead of handing it over immediately, she stepped closer and brushed a bit of lint from the center of my chest. Her fingertips lingered there, right above my heartbeat. The room seemed to narrow around us. My friend called from the hallway, asking where snacks were. She didn't move for one more second. Then she slid the hoodie into my hands and walked away as if nothing had happened. That night, I couldn't sleep, because she was right. This was no longer harmless. It wasn't just attraction anymore, or curiosity, or the thrill of being noticed. It was the way she listened when I spoke. The way silence with her felt full instead of empty. The way one brush of her hand could stay with me for hours. And the truth I didn't want to say out loud had become impossible to ignore. I wasn't visiting for my friend anymore. I was going there for her. The first crack appeared in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. My friend and I were in the living room arguing over a game neither of us was taking seriously when he laughed and tossed the controller onto the couch. "Bro, you come here more than I do now," he said. "Pretty sure my mom likes you more than me." He meant nothing by it. That was the problem. The joke hit the room like something fragile being dropped. I glanced toward the kitchen doorway. She stood there holding a bowl of sliced fruit, frozen for half a second before forcing a smile. "Impossible," she said lightly. "One of you is enough trouble." My friend laughed and kept talking, unaware. But she didn't look at me again. After that day, everything cooled. She was never rude. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, she became careful, formal, measured. When I arrived, she greeted me the way she might greet a neighbor. Our conversations shortened to practical things. Tea was offered from across the room instead of beside me. If we ended up alone, she always found a reason to leave. The warmth was gone so suddenly that I felt it everywhere. I stopped hearing her laugh. I stopped catching those glances that lingered too long. I stopped sleeping well. A week later, I found her alone in the garden at dusk, folding laundry from a basket beside her chair. The fading light softened everything around her, but not the distance in her posture. "Can we talk?" I asked. "You're talking now," she said without looking up. I stepped closer. "Why are you doing this?" She folded another towel with exact, unnecessary precision. "Doing what?" "You know what?" That made her pause. For a long moment, only the rustle of leaves moved between us. Then she set the towel down and finally met my eyes. "Because I forgot myself," she said quietly. I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I enjoyed something I should have kept under control." The words were calm, but I could hear strain beneath them. "You didn't do anything wrong." She gave a small, tired laugh. "That's easy for you to say." "It's true." "No." She stood then, facing me fully. "What's true is that people talk. They judge. They turn ordinary feelings into something ugly." Her voice sharpened before softening again. "And your friend, my son, he trusts both of us." There it was. Not rejection. Fear. "I would never hurt him," I said. "I know." Her eyes glistened. "That's what makes this harder." She turned away, crossing her arms tightly as if holding herself together. "I'm supposed to know better," she whispered. I closed the distance between us before I could think better of it. Gently, I reached for her hand. She stiffened the moment our fingers touched. Then slowly, so slowly I almost missed it, her hand opened and folded into mine. Warm, slightly trembling. "Real. You don't have to be ashamed of caring about someone," I said. She kept her eyes closed. "You think this is only caring?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. The question hit deep. Her fingers tightened around mine. When she looked at me again, tears had gathered at the edges of her eyes, though none had fallen. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Of me. Of wanting something I can't explain to anyone." I lifted our joined hands slightly. "Then don't explain it to everyone." A tear slipped free. She wiped it away immediately, almost angrily. "You make this sound simple." "It isn't," I said. "But it doesn't have to be shameful." For the first time in days, some of the hardness left her face. She squeezed my hand once, firm and grateful. Then she let go. "Go inside," she said softly. "Please." I wanted to argue. Instead, I nodded. As I walked back toward the house, I felt the ghost of her fingers still wrapped around mine. And I knew the distance between us hadn't ended anything. It had only revealed how much there was to lose. After the night in the garden, I stopped pushing. I still visited, but less often. When I did, I kept things easy. I talked with my friend, helped carry groceries when asked, fixed a loose cabinet hinge she'd mentioned once, then left before staying too long could become suspicious. If she was in the room, I treated her the same as always. Polite, steady, patient. It was harder than I expected. Sometimes I would catch her watching me from across the kitchen, only for her eyes to drop the second I noticed. Other times, she avoided me completely, and somehow that felt worse. But beneath all of it, something had changed. The fear between us no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a pause. A few weeks later, my friend invited me to a small family dinner for his birthday. Nothing formal, just food, laughter, too many dishes, relatives drifting in and out of rooms. I almost declined. Then I imagined not seeing her and said yes. The house was louder than usual, full of movement and voices. She moved through it gracefully, greeting guests, bringing plates to the table, smiling in that composed way people wore when they were responsible for everyone else's comfort. But every so often, her eyes found mine. Only for a second. Across the room, across the table, across the noise. And every time they did, something quiet passed between us that no one else could hear. Later, After the cake was cut and people began leaving, I carried empty dishes into the kitchen. The room was finally calm again. Water ran softly in the sink. She stood there alone, sleeves rolled up, rinsing plates. "I can do that," I said. "I know," she replied. "Stay anyway." So I did. For a minute, we worked side by side in comfortable silence. I dried plates while she washed them. The domestic simplicity of it felt strangely intimate. Then she set one dish down and turned off the water. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You don't." "Ido." She dried her hands slowly. I asked for patience I hadn't earned. I shook my head. "You didn't ask for anything. That's exactly the problem." A faint smile touched her lips. "You gave it anyway." The kitchen light was warm above us. Outside, the rest of the house had gone quiet. She looked at me then, not cautiously, not teasingly, not with fear. "Honestly, you made me feel visible again," she said. "Not admired, not chased, seen." Her voice softened. "Do you know how rare that is?" I swallowed. "You deserve that." Something trembled in her expression. I stepped closer, slowly enough to give her every chance to move away. She didn't. I took both of her hands in mine. Her fingers curled around them immediately, as if they had been waiting to. "I don't know what comes next," I said. "Neither do I." "That's fine." She let out a shaky breath that sounded almost like relief. Then she moved first. Her arms slipped around my waist, gentle but certain, and she rested her cheek against my chest. For a moment, I simply stood there, feeling the warmth of her body against mine, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the softness of trust after so much restraint. My hands rose to hold her carefully at the back of her shoulders. No ruse, no performance, just the quiet certainty of finally stopping the fight. I lowered my head and kissed her cheek slowly. She smiled against my chest. "We'll have to be careful," she murmured. "We will. People may talk. Let them get tired." That made her laugh softly, the real laugh I had missed. When she leaned back to look at me, her eyes were brighter than I had ever seen them. Then she took my hand again and intertwined our fingers. "Stay for tea," she said. It was such a small sentence. But this time, it sounded like the beginning of everything.